The only reason you have that house is because you threw a tantrum until we agreed to count it as your dowry. Patricia Cole let the words hang in the air like smoke from a cigarette she hadn't bothered to put out. She settled deeper into the Italian leather sofa, legs crossed at the ankle, the afternoon light slanting through the plantation shutters and catching the diamond on her finger. Tiny rainbows skittered across the ceiling like fugitive thoughts. Her phone rested on her knee, and she didn't look up. Her thumb kept scrolling, a steady, rhythmic motion that suggested the conversation was barely worth interrupting her feed. And now your stepfather is in a hospital bed. Cancer. The kind that eats through savings like kindling. The kind that doesn't care how much you love him or how many memories you've built. A pause. The scrolling stopped. Patricia's gaze remained fixed on the screen, but her voice sharpened, finding its target without needing eye contact. And you're telling me you can't find the money? Ryan Cole stood behind his mother, hands shoved so deep into his pockets that his shoulders hunched forward. He was a tall man, but in that room, under that ceiling, he seemed to fold in on himself. His eyes tracked a water stain on the hardwood floor, a faint ring near the leg of the coffee table, something Sophie had been meaning to have refinished for 2 years now. He didn't look at his wife. He couldn't. Every time his gaze drifted towards Sophie, it slid away like water off glass. Madison, Ryan's younger sister, was sprawled in the armchair by the window, a bag of trail mix balanced on her thigh. She picked out the M&Ms one by one with the fastidiousness of a jeweler sorting stones, letting the peanuts and raisins fall onto the cream-colored carpet. A small pile was already forming at her feet. Come on, Sophie. Henry gave you a whole house. The man practically handed you $500,000 worth of real estate, and you won't even scrape together $250,000 to keep him alive. She popped a chocolate candy into her mouth and chewed slowly, deliberately. What does that say about you? Honestly, what kind of person does that make you? Sophie Cole stood near the entryway, still in her blazer, still carrying the weight of the workday on her shoulders. Her work bag hung from one arm, the strap cutting into the fabric of her sleeve. Her phone was in her hand. The screen glowed with her banking app, savings, checking, the joint account she shared with Ryan. She had opened it without thinking, a reflex born of years of budgeting and tracking and quietly making sure the numbers added up. They didn't add up. They weren't even close. The joint account sat at a little over $12,000. Her personal savings, the account she'd opened 3 years into the marriage, after Patricia's first serious attempt to restructure their finances, held another $30,000. Ryan's retirement account was untouchable without penalties. And the house in Oakwood Hills, the one Henry had signed over to her with hands that trembled slightly from a lifetime of manual labor, was worth $850,000 on paper. But paper wasn't cash. Paper wasn't a wire transfer to an oncologist's billing department. Patricia set her phone down on the armrest, screen facing up, a gesture of deliberate finality. She lifted her chin and met Sophie's eyes for the first time since Sophie had walked through the door. Here's what's going to happen, Sophie. Her voice had the texture of polished stone. Smooth. Cold. Final. It was the voice of a woman who had spent decades learning exactly how to weaponize maternal authority, who could make a suggestion sound like a commandment and a commandment sound like a favor. You're going to sell that house. The one in Oakwood Hills. The one that's been sitting empty for 11 years while the market climbed and climbed. You're going to sell it, and you're going to use the money to pay for Henry's treatment. It's the right thing to do. It's the only thing to do. Any decent human being would have offered it the moment they heard the diagnosis. The fact that you're standing there, hesitating, tells me more about your character than I ever wanted to know. She paused, letting the silence fill the room like smoke. It pressed against the windows, settled into the corners, wrapped itself around Sophie's throat. And if you don't, the corner of Patricia's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Something colder. Then this family doesn't have room for a woman who'd let her own father die while she clings to a piece of property as if it means more than blood. As if wood and drywall and a 2-acre lot are worth more than the man who raised you. Her eyes flicked toward Ryan, then back to Sophie, the movement smooth and practiced. You and Ryan have been married 11 years. 11 years of building a life together. But a marriage needs a foundation.
Trust.
Loyalty. Generosity. And if you can't find it in yourself to be generous when it matters most, when it's life and death, then I don't know what kind of marriage this is. She plucked a piece of lint from her slacks, examined it, let it fall. You refuse to sell? You refuse to help the man who gave you that house? Then I'd say this marriage has run its course. And I will make sure Ryan understands that. Madison snorted. Finally. I've been saying this for years. She licked chocolate from her thumb. Welcome to the club, Sophie. Or goodbye, I guess. Ryan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His mouth opened, then closed. His throat bobbed with a swallow that seemed to take genuine effort. Sophie watched the muscles in his jaw work, watched him search for words that wouldn't come, watched him fail to find them. His fingers curled into fists inside his pockets, the fabric straining. Sophie looked at him, really looked, at the way his shoulders curved inward, a posture of perpetual apology. At the way his eyes, those warm brown eyes she'd fallen for back in college, when he'd sat across from her in the campus coffee shop and talked for 3 hours about astronomy and jazz and the novel he was going to write someday, slid away from her like she was a stranger on a bus. Like she was someone he recognized but didn't want to acknowledge. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, charged with the particular electricity that precedes a summer storm. Sophie could feel it pressing against her skin, against her temples, against the base of her skull where a headache was beginning to bloom. She turned her phone over in her palm. The screen went dark. Her thumb found the edge of the case and rested there. 11 years. 11 years of dinner tables and holiday gatherings and hospital visits. 11 years of biting her tongue when Patricia commented on her cooking, her cleaning, her failure to produce a grandchild. 11 years of Thanksgiving dinners where she was seated at the far end of the table, as far from Patricia as physically possible. 11 years of Christmas mornings where Madison's presents were extravagant and hers were regifted candles. 11 years of Ryan saying, "That's just how she is, and please don't make this into a thing, and she doesn't mean it like that." 11 years of shrinking, of making herself smaller and quieter and more accommodating, of learning to disappear in her own home. But the strange thing, the thing that surprised her, the thing that caught her off guard even as it settled over her, was how calm she felt. How still. The panic and the rage and the hurt were all there, churning somewhere deep, a dark current running beneath the surface of her composure. But above them, settling over everything like a layer of ice on a winter pond, was clarity. A crystalline, almost serene understanding of exactly where she stood and exactly what she needed to do. She'd been waiting for this moment. She just hadn't known it until now. "You're right, Patricia." Her voice came out steady, quieter than she'd expected. It didn't shake. It didn't waver. It just was. The house does need to be dealt with. It's been sitting empty too long. That's not good for anyone. Patricia's eyebrows rose a fraction. A flicker of triumph crossed her face, there and gone, like a fish breaking the surface of a pond. She hadn't expected capitulation this quickly. She'd been prepared for a fight. Sophie could see her recalibrating, adjusting her strategy in real time. Madison grinned, a chocolate smudge at the corner of her mouth, her eyes bright with the particular glee of someone who's been rooting for a disaster and finally gets to see one unfold. "Took you long enough. God, I thought we were going to be here all night." Ryan exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to deflate his entire body. His shoulders dropped an inch. The tension in his jaw loosened. He looked like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater and had finally broken the surface. Sophie watched their relief bloom and fill the room. She watched Patricia's posture shift from combative to victorious. She watched Madison's fingers return to the trail mix, plucking out another M&M with casual satisfaction. She watched Ryan's eyes finally meet hers, and she saw in them not gratitude, but something closer to absolution, the relief of a man who'd been told he didn't have to take a side after all. She let them have it. Let them think they'd won. Let the satisfaction settle over them like a warm blanket. Her fingers traced the edge of her phone, where a red recording icon had been pulsing since the moment Patricia opened her mouth. She'd pressed in the car, sitting in the driveway, watching the light in the kitchen window and knowing with the bone-deep certainty of someone who'd lived through too many of these conversations, that she was going to need a record of whatever happened next. And her other hand, the one resting inside her open bag, hidden from view, touched something cold. Metal. The teeth of a key. Not a house key. Something smaller, heavier, with a red plastic cover on the end. A key to a safety deposit box she'd rented 3 weeks ago, after the conversation that had finally, irrevocably, shattered something inside her. Something she'd put there on a hunch and never removed. She wrapped her fingers around it. The metal was cool against her palm.
"There's just one thing," she said.
The room stilled. The victory in Patricia's eyes flickered, dimmed, sharpened into wariness. The house gets sold.
Fine.
You're right. It needs to be dealt with, and it will be. Her gaze moved from Patricia to Ryan to Madison, slow and deliberate, making contact with each of them in turn. But how it gets sold, who buys it, and what happens to the money? She pulled her hand from the bag and let it rest at her side. The key pressed into her palm, a small, hard point of certainty. That's going to be my call. No one else's. Mine. 11 days earlier. Autumn in the suburbs had a smell, damp leaves, wood smoke, the first sharp edge of frost that promised winter was coming. Sophie parked in the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off, watching the light in the kitchen window. The house was a colonial revival, white with black shutters, the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a catalog. She and Ryan had bought it 6 years ago, after the promotion that had made her the primary breadwinner, and Patricia had spent the first 3 months criticizing the neighborhood. Too far from everything. No sense of community. The schools aren't what they used to be. Sophie had learned to stop listening. She'd been in meetings since 7 that morning. A product launch running 4 weeks behind schedule. A senior developer who'd quit without notice, leaving behind a codebase that was held together with hope and duct tape. 3 major clients threatening to walk if the Q4 deliverables weren't met. Her brain felt like a server running too many processes at once, the fans whining, the temperature climbing. She grabbed her bag and headed inside. Before she even got the key in the lock, she heard them. Patricia's laugh, high and theatrical, the laugh she used when she was performing for an audience. Madison's voice chattering over it like a radio tuned between stations, words spilling out in a rush. And my future mother-in-law, she's very traditional, you know? Old money, Connecticut, the whole thing. So I told her, look, my family has standards. We're not just anyone. When she saw the necklace, the one Mom gave me for my 25th, her whole face changed. She knew she wasn't dealing with some random girl from nowhere. She knew I came from something. That's my daughter. Patricia's tone was warm, indulgent, the voice she used for Madison and no one else. It was a voice Sophie had heard from a distance for 11 years, always directed at someone else, never at her. Never let them forget who you are. You're a Cole. You walk into a room like you own it. Ryan, you're covering the other half of the dinner, right? Mom said you would. A pause. Then Ryan's voice, weary, the voice of a man who'd long ago learned that the easiest way to end a conversation was to agree to whatever was being asked. Yeah, I got it. Sophie pushed the door open. The living room table was covered in jewelry boxes. Velvet cases propped open like tiny theater curtains. Gold chains spilling over the edges, pooling on the wood. A jade bracelet that must have cost 5 figures. A thick herringbone necklace that caught the light and threw it back in fragments. Earrings that glittered with what Sophie suspected were real diamonds. The collection looked like something from a magazine spread or an estate sale at a mansion. Madison held a chunky gold chain against her collarbone, tilting her head this way and that, examining her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. Sophie. Perfect timing. Tell me this one doesn't make me look like a banker's wife. David's mother wears something just like it, and I need to look like I belong at their country club, not like I'm trying too hard. Sophie set her bag on the hook by the door. She stepped out of her heels, wincing as her arches met the hardwood. It's fine. Just fine. Madison rolled her eyes with the full force of someone who'd been perfecting the gesture since adolescence. God, you're so helpful. Remind me to never ask your opinion on anything that matters. Patricia glanced up from a jade bangle she was inspecting, holding it up to the light. Her eyes swept over Sophie's work clothes. Wrinkled blouse, hair escaping its clip, the faint shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and her expression didn't change. It was the look of someone cataloging flaws, filing them away for future reference.
Oh.
You're home. I am.
Good.
Get me some hot water, will you?
Boiling.
I need to steep this ginger tea I brought. My digestion's been off all day. Something I ate at lunch, probably. Sophie walked to the kitchen. Behind her, the voices dropped but didn't disappear. They simply shifted into a lower register, the words becoming indistinct, but the tone unmistakable. She'd heard it enough times to know what it meant.
They were talking about her.
Can't even give you a child after 11 years. 11 years, Ryan. And what does she do? Works. Comes home late. Treats this house like a hotel. When was the last time she cooked you a proper meal? When was the last time she put you first? Mom, come on. It's not like that. I'm serious, Ryan. I've been patient. I've held my tongue for years. But someone has to say it. What exactly does she bring to this family? That house. That was a fluke. Henry felt guilty about her mother. That's all. It's not like she earned it. It's not like she contributed anything. The kettle rumbled on the stove. Sophie stood very still, one hand on the cool granite countertop, watching the water through the glass. Bubbles beginning to form at the bottom. The slow climb toward a boil. The house. Always the house. Her stepfather, Henry Donovan, had signed over the deed to a property in Oakwood Hills a few months before her wedding. She remembered the day with perfect clarity. He'd sat her down in his study, a small, cluttered room that smelled of old books and machine oil because Henry was always tinkering with something, and pushed a manila folder across the desk. His hands were the hands of a man who'd worked with them his whole life, calloused, scarred in places, the knuckles slightly swollen. But his eyes were gentle. This is for you, separate from everything else. It's not a loan. It's not a gift that comes with strings attached. It's yours.
Period.
No takebacks, no conditions. She'd tried to refuse. The house was worth over $500,000 even then, a sprawling 5-bedroom on 2 acres that Henry had bought years ago as an investment property and never gotten around to selling. It was too much. It was far too much. I can't, Henry. This is too much. I can't accept this. You can. And you will. He tapped the folder with one thick finger. I had a lawyer draw up an agreement. A good one. This property is yours alone. It's not part of your marriage. It's not community property. If things ever go sideways with Ryan or his family, he'd paused, choosing his words with the care of a man who'd seen too many things go sideways in his own life. You'll have something that belongs only to you. Something they can't touch. Something they can't take. She'd cried. Right there in his study, with the afternoon sun coming through the dusty windows and the smell of motor oil in the air. He'd pretended not to notice, busying himself with some papers on his desk until she'd pulled herself together. For 11 years, that house had sat empty. The market shifted as markets do. A new tech campus opened 3 miles away. A top-rated charter school moved into the district. The value climbed year after year, steady and relentless, until the real estate agents started calling twice a week, leaving voicemails about unprecedented sellers markets and all-cash buyers waiting, and we have a family who'd move in tomorrow. 500,000. Then 6. Then 850. The numbers became almost abstract, too large to feel real. Sophie never considered selling. The house was more than money. It was the only physical proof she had that someone, somewhere, had believed she deserved something of her own. Something that wasn't contingent on being a good wife or a good daughter-in-law or a good anything. Something that just was. The kettle clicked off. She poured the water into a mug, dropped in the tea bag, ginger and turmeric, the expensive kind Patricia preferred, and carried it back to the living room. Patricia didn't thank her. She took the mug, sniffed it with the air of a wine critic evaluating a suspect vintage, and set it aside to cool. "So," Patricia said, settling back into the sofa. "Madison's engagement dinner is in 3 weeks. David's family, his parents own that manufacturing plant outside the city. You know, the one, the auto parts supplier. They're covering the venue. The country club. Very exclusive. We need to match that. Something impressive. Something that shows we're not just riding their coattails." "Mom wants to give me the Oakwood house," Madison said, studying her nails with elaborate casualness. "As a wedding present. So I have assets going in. Leverage. David's family is all about assets. His mother asked me point-blank what I was bringing to the marriage, and I need to have a good answer." The room tilted. Sophie felt it physically, a vertiginous shift like the floor had dropped an inch. She looked at Ryan. He was staring at the jewelry boxes, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching near his temple. He knew. He'd known this was coming, and he hadn't warned her. "Is that a joke?" Sophie heard her own voice from a distance. "Please tell me that's a joke." Patricia's eyes narrowed. The warmth she'd shown Madison evaporated in an instant. Why would it be a joke? The house is just sitting there. Empty. Rotting. You don't use it. Ryan doesn't use it. It's doing nothing except accumulating property taxes. Madison's starting her life. She needs stability. She needs something to show David's family that she's not some charity case. It makes perfect sense. Any reasonable person would see that. "That house is mine." Sophie heard her own voice, steady despite the roaring in her ears. "Henry gave it to me before the wedding. It's not a family asset. It's not Ryan's. It's not yours. It's mine. Period." "Oh, please." Madison waved a hand, the gesture encompassing Sophie's entire argument and dismissing it as beneath consideration. "You've been married to my brother for over a decade. What's yours is his. What's his is yours. That's how marriage works. That's literally the whole point." "Actually," Sophie said, "that's not how the law works. The house is my separate property. I have a signed agreement that says so. It was drafted by a lawyer, notarized, and witnessed. It's ironclad." Patricia's expression hardened. The veneer of civility cracked, and underneath was something sharp and unyielding. "An agreement? You mean you had your stepfather draw up papers specifically to exclude my son? Specifically to make sure that if things didn't work out, Ryan would walk away with nothing?"
No.
"I mean, Henry wanted to protect me. He wanted to make sure I always had something of my own no matter what happened." "Protect you from what?" Patricia leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "What exactly did you need protection from? From us? From this family? From the people who took you in and treated you like one of their own?" The question hung in the air like a blade. From this, Sophie thought. From exactly this. From a woman who saw her as an obstacle and a man who wouldn't defend her and a sister-in-law who treated her possessions like a menu to order from.
She didn't say it.
Instead, she turned to Ryan, who was still staring at the jewelry boxes as if they held the secrets of the universe. "Are you going to say anything? Anything at all?" Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit she'd noticed on their third date and had found endearing back then. Now it just looked like stalling.
He looked exhausted.
Not angry, not defensive, just tired, in the way of a man who'd spent his life navigating between two women and had long ago given up trying to please either. "Look, Mom, if Sophie doesn't want to, don't you dare." Patricia's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't you dare take her side. I am trying to do something for your sister. Your sister, Ryan. Your flesh and blood. Do you want her going into this marriage with nothing? Do you want that woman's family looking down on her for the rest of her life? Do you want David's mother to spend the next 30 Thanksgivings making little comments about how she married beneath her? She's not going in with nothing, Mom. She has a townhouse, a shared account. That's nothing. That's pocket change to people like David's family. The Oakwood house is worth almost $1 million. It would change everything for her. It would give her a seat at the table. It would make her their equal, not their charity case." Sophie stood up. The motion was smooth, unhurried. She'd had practice standing up in meetings where people were trying to take things from her. "The answer is no. The house stays in my name. It's not being transferred to anyone. Not to Madison, not to Ryan, not to a trust, not to a joint account. It's mine, and it's staying mine. She walked out of the room. Each step felt deliberate, measured. Behind her, Patricia's voice rose, the careful modulation crumbling into something louder, rawer. You see how she speaks to me? In my own son's house? This is what I've been telling you for years, Ryan. She thinks she's better than us.
She's always thought that.
She's always held herself apart, like she was doing us a favor by marrying into this family. Sophie closed the bedroom door and leaned against it. The wood was cool against her back. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, in her temples, in the palms of her hands. Her heart was beating hard, but her hands were steady. She crossed to the dresser, knelt down. Her knees protested. She'd been standing all day, and opened the bottom drawer. The one with the lock she'd installed 3 years ago, after Patricia had helped clean while Sophie was at a conference and somehow found and read every bank statement in the drawer above. Patricia had brought them up at dinner that night. I couldn't help noticing your savings are a little low. Have you been spending on things you shouldn't be? Inside the drawer, a fireproof box. Small, gray, with a combination lock. Sophie opened it. Her fingers knew the combination by heart. The first thing on top was a photocopy of the deed, slightly yellowed at the edges. Beneath it, the original notarized gift agreement, signed by Henry in his careful, deliberate handwriting and witnessed by 2 attorneys whose names she'd never met but whose signatures she'd traced 100 times. The property known as 47 Oakwood Hills Drive is hereby gifted to Sophie Chin Cole as her sole and separate property, not subject to community property laws, and not subject to any claim by her spouse or his family, now or in the future. She traced her stepfather's signature with her finger. The ink had faded slightly, but the intent behind it was as solid as ever. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she'd saved 6 months ago, after a conversation at a work event. A colleague had mentioned a family law attorney who specialized in complex property cases. He's expensive, the colleague had said, but he's worth every penny. He's saved 3 of my friends from disaster. Sophie had taken the card, entered the number, and never quite been able to delete it. It rang twice. Adam Levinson's office. How can I help you? This is Sophie Cole. I need to schedule a consultation. It's regarding a premarital property agreement and, she paused, choosing her words with care, potential spousal pressure to transfer assets. I need to understand my options. What I can do. What I can't do. Of course. Mr. Levinson can see you Thursday at 2. We're at the Brackenridge building downtown. Suite 400. I'll be there. She hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, the fireproof box still open beside her. Outside the bedroom door, the voices continued, muffled but unmistakable. Patricia holding court, Madison chiming in, Ryan saying nothing. She'd been hearing those voices for 11 years. But something had shifted tonight. Something had clicked into place. She wasn't going to hear them for much longer. Not like this. Not as a supplicant, not as a target, not as someone who had to sit and take it because she had no other choice. She had choices. She'd always had choices. She'd just been too afraid to see them. The call from her mother came 3 days later. Sophie was at her desk, reviewing a vendor contract, the legalese blurring in front of her eyes. She'd been at it for 2 hours and was on her 3rd cup of coffee. Her phone buzzed with a photo of Ellen Donovan's face, a picture from last Christmas, her mother smiling in a red sweater, Henry's arm around her shoulder. Sophie picked up immediately. Her mother never called during work hours.
Mom?
What's wrong? Sophie. Her mother's voice was small, pushed through a throat that had been crying. Sophie could hear it in the roughness, the way the words caught and stumbled. It's Henry. They found something. They found something on his liver. The contract in front of Sophie blurred. The words ran together like watercolors left in the rain. She stood up, walked to her office window, and pressed one hand flat against the cold glass. The city spread out below her, indifferent and enormous. How bad? Malignant.
It's advanced.
The oncologist said surgery needs to happen within 3 weeks, and then there's a targeted therapy drug, very new, very expensive, not covered by most insurance plans. She broke off. Sophie heard her take a breath, the kind of breath you take before delivering news you don't want to deliver. They're estimating $250,000. All in. The surgery, the therapy, the follow-up care. And insurance is fighting us on most of it. They're calling the treatment experimental. Okay. Sophie's voice was calm. It surprised her how calm it was.
Mom.
Listen to me. We're going to figure this out. What do you and Henry have saved? What can you access? Maybe $40,000. His retirement accounts are down. The market's been rough, and we had to pull some out for the roof last year after that storm. You remember the one. I understand. Sophie turned from the window, her mind already running the calculations. I'll handle the rest. Sophie, no. That's too much. We can't ask you to do that. We can't. You're not asking. I'm telling you. She turned from the window, her voice firm. Henry is my father. He's been my father since I was 12 years old. He's the one who taught me how to ride a bike and how to drive a stick shift and how to stand up for myself. He's the one who gave me that house, so I'd always have something of my own. I'm not going to let him die because of a number on a hospital bill. End of discussion. She hung up and stood in the silence of her office. The hum of the HVAC system. The distant sound of traffic on the street below. The faint click of keyboards from the cubicles outside her door. $250,000. She and Ryan had about $120,000 in combined savings, the emergency fund they'd been building since the wedding, a little bit each month, a little bit from every bonus. Her own separate accounts, the ones she'd quietly maintained for years, depositing bonuses and tax returns and the occasional freelance project payment, held another $30,000. That left a $100,000 gap. The house in Oakwood was worth $850,000, conservatively. Possibly $900,000 in the current market. Carla Vasquez, the agent who'd been calling for 2 years, had said as much in her last voicemail. We're seeing properties in that neighborhood go for $950,000. The school district alone is driving prices through the roof. Sell it, and she could cover the treatment, the recovery, the follow-up care. She could pay off her mother's mortgage. She could still have plenty left over, hundreds of thousands of dollars left over. But she knew, with a certainty that sat like a stone in the pit of her stomach, that the moment the house sold, Patricia would descend. The money would become a battleground. Every dollar would be contested, claimed, demanded. Madison would suddenly remember expenses she needed covered. Patricia would have opinions about how the money should be managed. Ryan would be caught in the middle, torn between his wife and his mother, and Sophie knew exactly which way he'd lean. Unless she moved first. She called the real estate agent who'd been leaving her voicemails for 2 years. Carla Vasquez. Sophie had never met her in person, but she'd done her research. Carla had a reputation for discretion and speed. She specialized in high-value properties with complicated ownership situations. She'd handled divorces, estate disputes, properties caught up in litigation. She knew how to keep her mouth shut. Carla, it's Sophie Cole. The Oakwood property on Hills Drive. I'm ready to sell. Sophie. That's wonderful news. I have 3 buyers who've been waiting for that listing. Cash buyers, pre-qualified. I can get you full market value. In this market, we might even see a bidding war. I don't need full market value. I need fast. All cash. No financing contingencies. No inspection contingencies that aren't absolutely required by law. And I need absolute confidentiality. No signs in the yard. No open houses. No online listing photos. I don't want my husband or anyone in his family to know this is happening until it's done.
Can you do that?
A pause on the other end. Sophie could hear Carla processing the request, the implications clicking into place. I can work with that. It's unusual, but it's not unheard of. Private sales happen more often than people think. But you understand, a sale like that, you might leave money on the table. Without marketing exposure, without multiple offers, you might get less than the property is worth. I understand. I'm okay with that. Speed and discretion are more important than an extra $50,000.
All right.
I'll make some calls. I'll reach out to my cash buyers today. How soon do you need to close? As fast as humanly possible. That evening, Sophie came home to find Ryan already there. He'd ordered Thai food from the place on Mill Street, her favorite. The table was set with actual plates instead of takeout containers, and there were candles, the pillar candles she'd bought at the farmer's market last spring and never gotten around to using. He'd even opened a bottle of wine, a decent Pinot Noir. Hey. He kissed her cheek. He smelled like soap and the faint, familiar scent of his aftershave. Rough day. I thought you could use a break. I know things have been tense lately. She looked at him, at his careful smile, his nervous energy, the way his eyes kept darting toward her face as if checking her reaction, and she knew. Patricia had called him, told him about Henry, started the campaign. This wasn't a spontaneous gesture of marital support. This was a setup. Thanks. She sat down, shrugging off her blazer and draping it over the back of the chair. Have you talked to your mom?
Yeah.
He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd cataloged years ago. She said Henry's sick. Liver cancer. That's really hard, sophomore.
I'm sorry.
I know how close you two are. Thank you. She mentioned the treatment's expensive. Like, really expensive. More than most people can afford without some kind of help. $250,000. Sophie ladled rice and green curry onto her plate. She didn't look up. For the surgery and the first round of targeted therapy. Could be more depending on how he responds. Ryan winced. Jesus. That's a house. That's literally a house. Sophie served herself rice and curry, the steam rising from the plate in gentle curls. She took a bite. The curry was good, the right amount of spice, the vegetables still slightly crisp. She didn't say anything. So, Ryan poked at his noodles, pushing them around the plate without actually eating. Mom was saying, about the Oakwood house. She thinks. The fork paused halfway to her mouth. Sophie set it down carefully, deliberately, the tines resting on the edge of the plate with a small click. What about it? I think, look, don't get mad, okay? Just hear me out. He held up his hands, palms out, a gesture of preemptive surrender. But maybe she's right. You could sell it, cover the medical bills. There'd still be a lot left over, like a lot. We could pay down our mortgage, put some into savings. Maybe take that trip to Italy you've been talking about since forever. The one with the cooking classes in Tuscany and the villa with the infinity pool. Your mother wants me to sell the house, so I can pay Henry's medical bills and then what? Sophie's voice was flat. Put the rest into our joint account? The account she's been trying to get access to for years. Well, yeah. I mean, that's what married people do, isn't it? They pool their resources. They make decisions together. They share things. Sophie looked at him. Her husband of 11 years. The man she defended to her friends when they said he was too passive. The man she defended to her mother when she worried about Patricia's influence. The man she defended to herself every time she lay awake at night, wondering if she'd made a mistake. The man who'd once driven 3 hours in a snowstorm, Interstate 90 closed, visibility near zero, to bring her homemade soup when she had the flu in graduate school. The man who'd held her hand at her grandmother's funeral and whispered, "I've got you. I'm right here." That man was still in there somewhere. She believed that. She had to believe that because the alternative was too bleak to contemplate. But he was buried under years of Patricia's voice. Years of not making waves. Years of choosing the path of least resistance because resistance was exhausting and Patricia was relentless, and it was so much easier to just say yes. "Ryan," she said quietly, measuring each word, "if I sell the house, and I'm not saying I will, the money is mine. It's from my separate property. It was gifted to me, with documentation saying it's mine alone. Signed by Henry. Witnessed by 2 attorneys. Notarized. It's not community property. It's not a windfall for the family. It's not a dowry for Madison's wedding. It's not an early inheritance for you or anyone else. It's mine." His expression flickered. Something moved behind his eyes. Irritation, maybe, or hurt, or both. "Why do you always have to make it about my family?" every single thing, you turn it into an attack on them. They're not the enemy, Sophie, because your family is making it about them. Your mother has been trying to get her hands on that house for years. Years, Ryan. And now she's using my stepfather's cancer diagnosis as leverage. That's not trying to help. That's trying to help herself. They're just trying to help. Mom wants what's best for everyone. She's always been like that. They're trying to help themselves to $500,000. That's what they're trying to do. And you can't see it because you've been trained not to see it since you were a child. Ryan threw his napkin on the table. It landed in a crumpled heap next to his untouched noodles. God, Sophie, you're so suspicious. You think everyone's out to get you. You think every conversation is part of some master plan.
No.
I think Patricia is out to get my house. Specifically and deliberately. And Madison wants it for her wedding trousseau, her leverage, as she put it. And you. She stopped herself, the words catching in her throat. And me. His voice was tight, the veins standing out on his neck. What do I want? Since you apparently know everything about what everyone wants, what is it that I want? She didn't answer. Because the truth, the cold, bitter truth that she'd been avoiding for longer than she cared to admit, was that she wasn't sure anymore. She didn't know what he wanted. She didn't know if he even knew what he wanted. She didn't know if the man she'd married was still in there, or if he'd been slowly replaced by someone who just wanted to be left alone, to not have to choose, to not have to fight. The silence stretched between them, wide and deep and full of things neither of them knew how to say. The private showing was scheduled for Saturday morning. Carla had found a buyer in less than 72 hours, a man named George Hammond, recently retired after selling his logistics company, looking for a property where his elderly parents could age in place. Single level, wide doorways, a yard big enough for a garden but small enough to maintain. He'd been looking for 6 months and hadn't found anything that checked all the boxes. Sophie told Ryan she was meeting a friend for brunch. She'd laid out the cover story carefully, an old college roommate in town for the weekend, a restaurant downtown. They might go shopping afterward. Ryan had nodded without really listening, his attention on the baseball game on his laptop. She drove to Oakwood Hills and parked around the corner from the house, on a quiet street lined with sugar maples that were just beginning to turn. Through her windshield, she had a clear view of the property. The wide front porch, the old oak tree in the backyard whose branches reached toward the second-story windows, the dormer windows that caught the morning light just so. Carla arrived first, a sleek woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a low bun. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for decades and had long ago stopped wasting time. 10 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled up. An older man in a tailored wool coat got out. George Hammond, Sophie assumed, accompanied by a younger woman with a briefcase. An attorney, or a financial advisor, or both. Sophie watched from her car as they toured the house. The front door opened and closed. Lights went on in rooms that hadn't been lit in years. 20 minutes passed, then 40, then an hour. She watched the windows, trying to read the conversation from the shadows moving behind the glass. When they emerged, Hammond was nodding. Not the polite nod of someone being courteous, but the decisive nod of someone who'd made up his mind. The woman with the briefcase was making notes on a legal pad. Sophie's phone buzzed. Carla, he wants it. 800,000 cash. Close in 21 days. No contingencies beyond standard title and inspection. Can you meet tomorrow to sign the papers? Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she typed back. Yes. Bluebird Cafe, downtown. 10 a.m. I'll be there early. She put the phone down and looked at the house. The wide porch where she'd imagined sitting on summer evenings, the oak tree where she'd pictured a swing, the windows that caught the morning light and held it. Henry had bought this place when she was in high school. He'd said he wanted something solid, something permanent, after a life of moving from apartment to apartment, never putting down roots. And then he'd given it to her. His only child from his second marriage. His stepdaughter, technically, but he'd never used that word. She's my daughter, he'd tell anyone who asked. End of story. Now she was selling it to save his life. There was a strange symmetry to it. A circle closing. The gift he'd given her returned to him in the form of treatment and recovery and more time. She started the car and drove away. The sugar maples blurred past her windows, a wash of orange and gold. She didn't see the other car, a silver Honda Civic, unremarkable in every way, parked 3 blocks down, tucked between a minivan and a landscaping truck. She didn't see Patricia behind the wheel, phone pressed to her ear, watching the house, watching Carla, watching the buyer, watching Sophie. She didn't see Patricia's lips move, forming words into the phone. She didn't see the expression on Patricia's face shift from curiosity to shock to something colder, more calculating. She didn't see any of it. They were waiting for her when she got home. All 3 of them. Patricia on the sofa, her posture rigid, her hands folded in her lap like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Madison on the armchair, legs tucked under her, her phone face down on the armrest for once. Ryan standing by the window with his arms crossed, his back to the room, staring out at the street. On the coffee table, Sophie's laptop was open. Her email was on the screen. The thread with Carla. The meeting confirmation for tomorrow morning. The subject line that read Confidential, 47, Oakwood Hills Drive, Offer and Acceptance. The words Sophie had written. Please do not list this property publicly. Please do not disclose the sale to my spouse until closing. This is a sensitive matter. Sophie's stomach dropped. A physical sensation, like the floor had given way beneath her feet. Explain. Patricia's voice was ice. Just the one word, but it carried the weight of an entire indictment. Sophie set her keys down on the table by the door. Slowly, deliberately. Her hand didn't shake. Explain what, Patricia? Explain this. Madison grabbed the laptop and turned it around, the screen glowing with Sophie's private correspondence. You're selling the house. Behind our backs. Behind Ryan's back. You specifically told a real estate agent to hide it from your own husband. Your own husband, Sophie. The man you stood in front of a church and made vows to. That's my private email. Sophie's voice was calm, but she could feel the heat rising in her chest. You had no right to go through my laptop. That's illegal. That's a violation of privacy. That's your marriage. Patricia shot back, rising from the sofa with a fluid motion. And you're sneaking around like a thief in the night. What are you planning, Sophie? To sell the house, pocket the cash, and disappear? To take $800,000 and start a new life somewhere while my son comes home to an empty house? I'm planning to pay for my father's cancer treatment. That's what I'm planning. The entire reason I'm selling the house is to save Henry's life. Oh, please. Patricia took a step forward, her eyes blazing. You're planning to cut this family out. I can see it all over your face. You've been planning this for years. You think you're so clever. You think you can take that money and run and we'll just stand here and let it happen. Ryan finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. He still hadn't turned from the window. Sophie, why didn't you tell me? I'm your husband. We're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to make decisions like this together. She faced him. She wanted him to turn around. She wanted him to look at her. He didn't. Because I knew this would happen. I knew the moment the house sold, your mother would be at our door with a spreadsheet and a list of demands. I knew Madison would start talking about her engagement and her leverage and her future in-laws. I knew you'd be caught in the middle, and I knew, her voice caught, the words scraping against her throat. I knew you'd choose them. I knew you'd pick their side. You always do. The words landed like stones in still water. The ripples spread outward. Ryan turned from the window. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. That's not fair. That's not. You can't just. Isn't it? When have you ever chosen me? When have you ever stood up to your mother and said, no, this is Sophie's, leave her alone? When have you ever defended me without adding a but, or a maybe, or a please don't make this into a thing? Never. The answer is never. Sophie picked up her laptop and closed it. The screen clicked shut, and the room felt suddenly darker.
So yes.
I kept it quiet, because I wasn't going to let anyone, not your mother, not your sister, not you, get in the way of saving Henry's life. He is dying, Ryan. He has weeks. And I will not let your family's greed be the reason he doesn't get treatment. Patricia stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood. You listen to me, you ungrateful little. Careful. Sophie held up a hand. The gesture was calm, almost casual. Before you finish that sentence, you should know something. Something I've been waiting to tell you. She reached into her bag. The leather was cool under her fingers. She pulled out her phone. The screen glowed. She tapped the recording app, found the file she wanted, and pressed play. Patricia's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. You're going to sell that house. You don't have a choice. Unless you want to find yourself without a marriage and without a family. Unless you want to be alone for the rest of your life, which is exactly what you deserve. A pause, then. And if you don't, then this family doesn't have room for a woman who'd let her own father die while she holds onto a piece of property like it means more than blood. Like a house is worth more than a human life. The recording played on. Madison's voice. Took you long enough. Ryan's voice. Nothing. Just silence, stretching out into the digital void. Sophie stopped the playback. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. I've been recording every conversation about this house since the night you told me to sign it over to Madison. She looked at each of them in turn. Patricia, white-faced and rigid. Madison, mouth slightly open. Ryan, who had finally turned from the window and was staring at her as if seeing a stranger. That's not the only recording. There are others. Emails, text messages, screenshots, a whole file, a whole documented history of harassment and coercion and attempted theft. Patricia's face had gone white. The color had drained from it like water from a sink. You can't record people without their knowledge. That's illegal. That's a crime. Actually, in this state, you can. Single-party consent. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, and that person is me, it's perfectly legal. Sophie slipped the phone back into her bag. I checked. I checked with my attorney. Everything I've recorded is admissible in court. The room was silent. Even the ticking of the clock on the mantel seemed to stop. Ryan stared at her. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. He looked like a man who'd just discovered that the ground he'd been standing on was actually a trapdoor. Here's what's going to happen, Sophie said. She was surprised by how steady her voice was. How calm. I'm meeting the buyer tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I'm signing the contract. The money, all of it, is going into an account in my name only. It will be used for Henry's treatment. Every dollar will be accounted for. Every invoice saved. Every transfer documented. If there's money left over, it will stay in my account, and I will decide what to do with it. She picked up her work bag and slung it over her shoulder. And if anyone tries to interfere with that sale, or lays claim to that money, or spreads one more rumor about what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, I will take every recording, every email, every text, and I will hand them to my attorney, Adam Levinson. And then I will see you in court. And I will win. Because the law is on my side, and the evidence is on my side, and the truth is on my side. She walked toward the door. Her heels clicked on the hardwood, a steady, measured rhythm. You can't just leave, Madison shouted, her voice cracking. You can't just walk out. What about Ryan? What about your marriage? Sophie stopped with her hand on the doorknob. The brass was cool against her palm. She didn't turn around. Watch me. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. She checked into a hotel near the hospital. Not the one where Henry was being treated. That was across town, but close enough that she could get there in 15 minutes if something went wrong. A small suite. Clean lines. Neutral colors. A window that looked out over the city, the lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled in. She sat on the edge of the bed, the bedspread smooth and impersonal beneath her, and called her mother. The house sold. $800,000. We'll have the first payment by Tuesday. Tell the hospital we're good for the surgery. Tell them to schedule it as soon as possible. Oh, Sophie. Her mother's voice broke on the second syllable. Sophie could hear her crying, the quiet, restrained kind of crying that women of her generation did when they didn't want to be a burden. Oh, baby. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just tell Henry to get better. Tell him I love him. Tell him I'll be there Thursday morning before they take him into surgery." She hung up and sat in the quiet. The hotel room hummed with the distant sound of the HVAC system. Outside the window, the city glittered, indifferent and vast. Then she called her attorney, Adam Levinson. He answered on the second ring. "The sale is moving forward. But there's a complication. My husband's family found out about it. They went through my laptop. They confronted me. I left the house. I'm at a hotel. Are you safe?" His voice was calm, professional, but there was an edge of concern beneath it. "I'm safe. I'm fine. But I need a few things from you." "Tell me what you need." "A draft of a post-nuptial agreement. Something that makes it absolutely, unambiguously clear that the Oakwood sale proceeds are separate property, now and forever. And a cease and desist letter. If Patricia or Madison contact me again about the money, if they call, text, email, show up at my office, anything, I want them to know there will be legal consequences. I want it in writing. I can have both ready by Monday. I'll email you drafts by Sunday night." Also, she hesitated. The word hung in the air. "I think this is going to end in divorce. I think this is the end of my marriage." A pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I'm sorry to hear that. I know that's not an easy thing to come to terms with." "Don't be sorry. It's been ending for a long time.
I just didn't want to see it.
I didn't want to admit it, but I see it now." The signing took place at a coffee shop downtown. The Bluebird Cafe, a small independent place with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture, and a barista who knew Sophie's order by heart. George Hammond was exactly on time. He walked in at 9:58, his attorney at his side, and made his way to the table Sophie had chosen in the back corner, away from the windows. He was older than he'd looked from a distance, 70, maybe 72, with the kind of quiet dignity that came from a lifetime of making things and selling things and taking care of people. His lawyer reviewed the contract, asked 2 clarifying questions about the title history, and then nodded. Pens moved across paper. Signatures were affixed. A cashier's check for $50,000, the earnest money, was slid across the table with a soft whisper of paper on wood. "The rest of the first payment will be wired by Wednesday morning," Hammond said. "I've already instructed my bank. There shouldn't be any delays." He paused, his eyes meeting Sophie's. "I'm sorry about your father. Truly. I lost my own father to cancer 12 years ago. It's a hard road. I hope he recovers well." "Thank you, Mr. Hammond. That means a lot." Sophie walked out of the coffee shop with a signed contract in her bag and $50,000 in her account. The morning sun was bright, almost too bright, and the air had that crisp autumn clarity that made everything look sharper, more defined. She was halfway to her car when a hand grabbed her arm. The grip was tight, insistent. She spun. Ryan. He looked awful. Unshaven, his jaw shadowed with stubble. Eyes red, either from crying or lack of sleep, or both. His shirt was buttoned wrong, the second button in the third hole, the collar askew, like he'd dressed in the dark, or like he'd stopped caring halfway through the process. Behind him, Patricia and Madison were getting out of a silver Honda, their faces set with fury. "You signed the papers." His voice cracked on the last word. "You actually did it. You sold it. Without even talking to me. Without giving me a chance to."
"Yes.
I sold it. It's done. Without me. Without even telling me. I'm your husband, Sophie. I'm supposed to be your partner. I tried to tell you. I tried to have that conversation 3 nights ago, and you told me to do what your mother wanted. You sat at the dinner table and told me to sell the house and put the money in our joint account so your mother could manage it. So don't stand here and tell me I didn't try." "I didn't," he stopped. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him.
"Sophie, please."
"This is insane. You're my wife. We're supposed to make decisions together. We're supposed to be a team. Then act like my husband." She pulled her arm free. The spot where his fingers had been felt cold. "Stand up for me. Right here, right now. Tell your mother that my property is none of her business. Tell Madison she's not getting a dime from the sale. Tell me just once, Ryan, just once in 11 years, that you're on my side. That you'll back me up.
That you'll choose me.
He stared at her. The silence stretched. 1 second.
2, 5.
And in that silence, Sophie felt the last thread break. The last, frayed connection between who they'd been and who they'd become. It didn't snap with a dramatic flourish.
It just dissolved.
Like a rope that had been rotting underwater for years, finally giving way. That's what I thought. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. That's what I've always known. She turned and walked toward her car. Sophie, wait. Patricia's voice rang out across the parking lot, sharp and strident. You can't do this. We'll sue you. We'll take you to court. We'll tell everyone what kind of woman you are, how you lied and schemed and tore this family apart. Sophie opened her car door. Before she got in, she looked back over her shoulder. Go ahead. Tell everyone. But if you do, make sure you mention that my stepfather is dying of cancer. Make sure you mention that I sold the only major asset I owned to pay for his treatment. And make sure you mention that you tried to stop me because you wanted the money for your daughter's dowry. Make sure you tell the whole story, Patricia. Every single detail. She got in the car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, she watched the three of them standing in the parking lot, growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday at 7 in the morning. Sophie spent the next 3 days in a blur of bank transfers, insurance calls, and hospital paperwork. The first payment from the sale came through on Wednesday, $400,000, the first installment of the purchase price, and she wired $250,000 directly to the hospital's billing department. She sent the confirmation number to her mother, along with a short message. It's done. The bill is paid. Focus on Henry now. Nothing else matters. On Thursday morning, she sat in the hospital waiting room with her mother. The chairs were upholstered in a shade of blue that was probably meant to be calming, but just looked institutional. The coffee from the vending machine was terrible and lukewarm. The television in the corner played a morning news program, with the sound muted. Ellen Donovan was a small woman, worn thin by years and worry, but her spine was straight. She dressed carefully for the surgery. A clean blouse, her hair brushed and pinned, as if looking put together could somehow influence the outcome. She held Sophie's hand in both of hers. He's going to be okay, Sophie said. He's the strongest person I know. I know. Her mother squeezed her hand. Because of you. Because of what you did.
I hope you know that.
I hope you never forget it. The surgery took 6 hours. Sophie and her mother sat through all of them, leaving only to use the restroom or to get more terrible coffee. They talked a little about Henry, about the cottage he'd always wanted to buy near the coast, about the garden he'd been planning for years but never gotten around to planting. Mostly, they sat in silence, the kind of silence that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. When the surgeon emerged, she was smiling. The kind of exhausted, relieved smile that told you everything you needed to know before she even opened her mouth. It went well. Better than we expected, honestly. We got clear margins, no sign of spread beyond what the scans showed. He's stable. He'll need the targeted therapy 6 months at least, maybe longer. But the prognosis is good. Very good. Sophie felt something release in her chest. A knot she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there, a tension that had become so familiar it felt like part of her anatomy. It loosened, dissolved, disappeared. She excused herself, walked to the hospital chapel, a small, quiet room tucked away on the 3rd floor, with a stained glass window depicting a sunrise over a calm sea and padded kneelers arranged in neat rows, and sat in the back row. The light coming through the stained glass was blue and gold and soft.
She didn't pray.
She wasn't sure she remembered how. She just breathed, in and out, until the trembling in her hands stopped. The divorce papers were filed 3 weeks later. Sophie's attorney handled the filing, a thick stack of documents delivered to the county courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Ryan was served at work. Sophie had specified that she didn't want him served at home, where Patricia might intercept the papers and turn it into another scene. Ryan contested. Of course he contested. Patricia hired him a lawyer, a sharp-jawed man in an expensive suit who specialized in contested divorces and had a reputation for dragging things out, and they came to the table with a list of demands that stretched across 4 single-spaced pages. The house sale proceeds, half the joint savings,
Alimony.
Sophie's retirement account. They argued that the Oakwood property was a de facto marital asset because Sophie had held it out as family property, because she'd mentioned it in conversations, because she'd let Ryan drive past it once, because she'd allowed the family to believe it was part of the marital estate. They argued that the gift agreement was invalid because Henry hadn't used the exact legal language required by the state's community property statute. They argued that Sophie had committed fraud by selling the house without Ryan's knowledge and consent, and that the proceeds should therefore be forfeited to the marital estate. Sophie's attorney, Adam Levinson, dismantled each argument one by one, with the methodical precision of someone taking apart a clock. The gift agreement was notarized and witnessed by 2 licensed attorneys. It used exactly the language required by state law. The property had never been titled in Ryan's name. No joint funds had ever been used for its maintenance, taxes, or insurance. Sophie had paid those from her separate account, and she had 11 years of receipts to prove it. The sale proceeds had been deposited into Sophie's separate account and used exclusively for Henry's medical treatment, a fact documented by over 200 pages of bank statements, invoices, and hospital receipts. The property was her separate property, Adam told the judge during the preliminary hearing. The sale proceeds are her separate property. And the idea that my client's husband is entitled to money she raised to save her dying father's life is, frankly, offensive. It's offensive to the law, it's offensive to common sense, and it's offensive to basic human decency. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for low tolerance for theatrics, agreed. She'd been on the bench for 23 years. She'd seen everything. Very little surprised her anymore. The final judgment came down on a Tuesday in late January. The Oakwood sale proceeds, Sophie's separate property. The marital home, sold, with proceeds split 60-40 in Sophie's favor, reflecting her larger financial contribution over the course of the marriage and the fact that she'd made the down payment from her premarital savings. Sophie's retirement account, hers alone. Ryan's retirement account, his alone. Joint savings, split equally, which Sophie considered a small price to pay for finality. No alimony. No spousal support. No ongoing financial entanglement of any kind. The ruling included one more provision, one that Adam had suggested and Sophie had initially resisted but ultimately agreed to. Patricia Cole and Madison Cole were ordered to publish written apologies, approved by the court, on their social media accounts and in the Cole family group chat, retracting the false statements they'd made about Sophie over the past several months. The statements about her stealing the house, about her abandoning Ryan, about her being a gold digger who'd married into the family for financial gain. They were also ordered to pay Sophie's legal fees and $20,000 in damages for defamation, a figure the judge arrived at after reviewing the text messages and social media posts that Sophie's attorney had submitted as evidence. Patricia's apology appeared on her Facebook page at 11:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. It was stiff, resentful, and lasted exactly the 72 hours required by the court before she deleted it with a single, furious click. But the damage or the justice, depending on your perspective, was done. Everyone had seen it. Everyone in Patricia's social circle, everyone in the extended Cole family, everyone who'd been told for years that Sophie was the villain in this story. They'd all seen the court-ordered apology. They'd all read the words. And they'd all drawn their own conclusions. 6 months passed. Spring turned into summer, and summer began its slow fade into autumn. Henry completed his treatment. The targeted therapy worked, better than the oncologist had hoped, better than anyone had dared to expect. His scans came back clean in June and then again in August, and by September the word remission was being used in his medical file. He and Ellen sold their house, the one with the roof that had needed replacing, the one that had been too big for the two of them anyway, and moved into a smaller place near the coast. A cottage with a garden that sloped down toward the water, with a view of the harbor and the fishing boats coming in at dawn. Sophie bought herself an apartment. A 2-bedroom in a high-rise downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city and a kitchen island big enough to spread out her work and still have room for a cutting board. She filled it with plants, a monstera that quickly took over one corner, a fiddle-leaf fig that was more finicky than she'd expected, a row of succulents on the windowsill. She filled the walls with art she'd collected over the years, but never had room to display. She bought herself a bed with sheets that cost more than she'd ever spent on linens before, and she slept in the exact center of it, starfish style, just because she could. She got promoted. Director of Product. A corner office on the 14th floor and a team of 12 and a salary that made her blink the first time she saw the number on paper. She started running again, 3 miles along the river every morning before work, the rhythm of her feet on the pavement a kind of meditation. She started cooking again, real meals with fresh ingredients and spices that made the whole apartment smell like a restaurant, the kind of cooking she'd given up years ago because Patricia always complained about the garlic, the cumin, the foreign flavors. And then, one Sunday in late September, Henry asked her to come to the cottage for lunch. Nothing fancy, he'd said on the phone. Just sandwiches. But there's something I want to talk to you about. She drove out in the late morning, the road winding through hills that were just beginning to turn gold and amber. The cottage was exactly what she'd pictured, small and white with blue shutters, a garden out front that was already showing the signs of Henry's obsessive attention, a view of the water that stretched out to the horizon. Henry was in the garden when she arrived, kneeling in the dirt, planting something. His hands were covered in soil, and there was a streak of it across his forehead where he'd pushed his hair back. "You're supposed to be resting," Sophie said, getting out of the car. "Doctor's orders. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity." "I've been resting for 6 months." He stood up, brushing soil from his knees with the backs of his hands. "I'm done resting. Resting is boring. Come inside. There's something I want to talk to you about. Something important." They sat at the kitchen table. It was an old oak table, scarred and beautiful, the kind of table that had seen decades of meals and conversations and spilled coffee. Ellen poured tea, Earl Grey, Sophie's favorite, and set out a plate of shortbread cookies. The light came through the window in long, amber shafts, catching the dust motes floating in the air. "When I was sick," Henry said, settling into the chair across from her, "I had a lot of time to think. You do in a hospital bed. There's not much else to do. And I thought a lot about what matters, about what I want to leave behind, about what I want my life to have meant." He pulled a folder from the sideboard, a plain manila folder, just like the one he'd pushed across his desk 11 years ago, and set it in front of her. "You know, I invested in a tech company a long time ago. A small thing. Industrial automation. Robotics, mostly. I never talked about it because it didn't seem important. Just a favor for a friend who was starting a business and needed some seed money." Sophie opened the folder. There were stock certificates, account statements, a letter from a financial management firm with a name she vaguely recognized from business magazines. Her eyes tracked down the page to the summary at the bottom, where the numbers were printed in crisp, black ink. Estimated current value, $1.8 million. "Henry," her voice caught. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Henry, this is... Let me finish." He sat down across from her, folding his hands on the table. His knuckles were swollen, the skin weathered, but his hands were steady. "That money has been sitting there for years. I never touched it, because I didn't need to. It was just there, growing. Now, I wanted to do something useful." He explained the structure. A trust, an irrevocable family trust, with Sophie as the primary beneficiary. The assets would be managed by a professional firm, the same one that had been handling the investments for the past decade. They'd be protected. From lawsuits. From creditors. From future spouses. Sophie could draw on them for specific purposes. Education, a business venture, a home purchase, her own children's futures if she ever chose to have them. "It's not a handout," Henry said, his voice gruff. "It's not charity. It's insurance. The Oakwood house was supposed to be that for you. A safety net. Something to catch you if you ever fell. And it worked. It paid for the treatment. It saved my life, but it also nearly got taken away. By people who saw it as their property, not yours." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she rarely saw from him. "This is different. No one can touch this. No one can pressure you to sign it over. No one can claim it in a divorce or a lawsuit or a family argument. It's yours, Sophie, in a way that nothing can undo, in a way that no one can challenge. Sophie looked at her stepfather, at his tired, kind face, still thinner than it had been before the cancer, but filling out a little more each month. At the hands that had signed that first agreement 11 years ago, the hands that had planted gardens and fixed cars and held her mother through the long, dark nights of his illness. At the eyes that had watched her grow from a nervous 12-year-old into a woman who could stand in a courtroom and refuse to flinch. I don't know what to say. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't have words for this. Say you'll use it to build something. Something that matters to you. Something that makes you happy. That's all I want. That's all I've ever wanted. He reached across the table and patted her hand, his palm rough and warm. You're my daughter, Sophie. You have been since the day I met your mother. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you've become. She nodded. Her throat was too tight for words. Outside the window, the light was turning gold, and the water was glittering, and somewhere in the garden, a bird was singing. A year later, on a cold November morning, Sophie drove out to Oakwood Hills for the first time since the sale. She didn't go to the house. She didn't even drive down the street. She parked a block away, at the edge of a small park that overlooked the neighborhood, and sat on a bench that faced the valley. From there, she could just see the roof of 47 Oakwood Hills Drive, the new roof, she noticed. The new owners had replaced the old cedar shingles with dark gray architectural shingles. They'd painted the house a soft sage green instead of the white it had been when she owned it. Added a deck off the back. There was a swing set in the backyard now, visible through the bare branches of the oak tree, and a golden retriever was running in circles around the trunk, chasing something. A ball, maybe, or a squirrel. It looked happy. Lived in. Loved. Sophie sat there for a long time. The cold seeped through her coat, through her jeans, but she didn't mind. She thought about the girl she'd been when that house was signed over to her. Young, hopeful, nervous about her upcoming marriage, clinging to the only asset she had that was truly and unequivocally hers. She thought about the woman she'd become in the years since, the woman who'd learned to fight, to document, to protect herself with contracts and recordings and lawyers. The woman who'd sat in a courtroom and refused to flinch. She thought about Patricia and Madison, who'd faded into irrelevance like photographs left in the sun. Madison's engagement to David had fallen apart 6 months after the divorce, something about irreconcilable differences, though Sophie suspected the real issue was that David's mother had learned about the court-ordered apology and decided the Coles weren't the kind of family she wanted her son marrying into. Patricia's social circle had shrunk, her influence diminished, her schemes reduced to nothing but a few screenshots in Sophie's archived files. She thought about Ryan. She'd seen him once, at a distance, in a grocery store in the suburb where they'd once lived. He'd looked older, thinner. His hair was graying at the temples. He'd seen her, too. Their eyes had met across the produce section, over a display of organic apples, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then he'd turned and walked the other way, his cart rattling on the linoleum. She didn't feel anger anymore, or grief, or even satisfaction. She felt done, finished, complete. The house was just a house now. The money was just money. The recordings and the contracts and the legal battles, they were just the tools she'd used to survive a war she'd never asked to be part of. They'd served their purpose. They could be put away now. What mattered was what came next. She stood up from the bench. Her legs were stiff from the cold, and her breath clouded in the air. The wind was cold against her face, but the sun was bright, and the sky was that particular shade of winter blue that seems to go on forever. She walked back to her car, a new electric model, sleek and quiet, that she'd bought herself as a promotion gift, and drove toward the city. She had a meeting at 3. A startup she'd been mentoring on the side, a young woman with a brilliant idea for a software platform and absolutely no idea how to protect her intellectual property. Sophie was going to help her with that, was going to show her how to build something that couldn't be taken away, was going to teach her everything she'd learned the hard way. And tonight, she had dinner with Henry and her mother at the cottage. Her mother was making pot roast, Henry's favorite, the recipe she'd been perfecting for 30 years. Henry was going to show her the plans for his new greenhouse, the one he'd been designing all winter, with a heating system that would let him grow tomatoes year-round. And tomorrow, there would be work and friends and the life she'd built piece by piece, brick by brick, choice by choice. She stopped at a bakery on the way home, a small place that had just opened on a corner in her neighborhood, with a display case full of things that looked too beautiful to eat. Croissants that gleamed with butter, tarts arranged with geometric precision, a cake, 3 layers, dark chocolate and raspberry and edible gold leaf, with a small card propped in front of it that read, "New Chapter." She bought a slice. The woman behind the counter wrapped it carefully in a white box and tied it with a piece of baker's twine. "Celebrating something?" the woman asked, her smile bright and genuine. Sophie thought about it. She thought about hospital waiting rooms and hotel beds and courtrooms. She thought about recordings and contracts and the key to a safety deposit box. She thought about a manila folder pushed across a desk and another one pushed across a kitchen table and all the years between them. "Yes," she said. "Everything. All of it." She took the cake home. She made coffee, the good kind, the single-origin beans she'd started buying from the roaster down the street. She sat by the window in her apartment and watched the city light up as the sun went down, the buildings turning gold, and then amber, and then glittering with electric light. And she felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, longer than her marriage, longer than her years of shrinking, longer than all the dinner tables and holiday gatherings and hospital visits combined, completely, entirely, and absolutely free.